anybody else noticed that, but we kind of had a problem there. Went offline just for a minute, but I think everything's going the way it's supposed to. So, um, yeah. So, okay. Well, we're live, and it says that we're live, so I'm assuming we're live. Never had that happen before, but my um my Ethernet cables slid out of my hub, like in the middle of a countdown, and I'm like, "What do you mean we're offline?" Oh, okay. So I guess we're online. I'm checking our channels through my cell phone just to make sure. Give me a thumbs up if you're. I see that we do still have viewers miraculously. So give me a thumbs up on the live chat if we are live and you can see us. So so yeah. Um, I'm inclined to say maybe we should try again, but I think we're going. Yeah, okay, we're picking up viewers and stuff, so we must be live. Sorry, guys, I'm still kind of green with this, and that was interesting. That was something new. So yeah. So okay, back on task tonight with the truth conversation. We have one of my good friends, Richard Eng, with us tonight, and Richard is a graduate of the Apologetics program here at Houston Christian University. But he, like me, graduated when it was Houston Baptist University, so our degrees still match. So that's cool. um, but Richard he's an interesting guy because he's got a really a big heart for apologetics, and he's also got a big heart for youth. And by youth, I mean he's got a big heart for like the little kids and apologetics, and that's really cool. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Give you a quick introduction to Richard, though. He serves as lead pastor at Bethel EV Free Church in Devils Lake, North Dakota. He's the author of the illustrated children's book "What Is Heaven Like," published in 2022, and is doing pretty good on Amazon. You can check that out. And has written on faith and cultural issues for the Expository Times, Free Thinking Ministries, Cross Examine, and others. He received his MA in Cultural Apologetics from HBU, Houston Baptist University, and degrees in ministry and Bible from Grace University. So, really excited for you guys to meet my friend Richard here tonight. We're going to bring him on, and as we talk tonight, we're going to talk about some of the things that Richard's got going on. He's got some really cool stuff coming up. I know that you're gonna like to hear this, especially if you have a heart for youth and the young people in your church, especially the little kids. Like getting apologetics to the little kids is we would think is a real challenge, but not for Richard. He loves to do this, so that's what he does. So so Richard, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into ministry, how you got into apologetics and things, and of course, with all of our videos, toward the end we will do a live Q&A. So if you do have some questions, just put them in the comments section on the Truth Conversation Facebook page, not my personal Facebook page, but the Truth Conversation Facebook page, or log on to our YouTube channel. Like this video, subscribe, help us out in that way. That's actually one of the best things you could do to help our ministry out right now, is just subscribe, and recommend us to other people, and get your friends watching and all of that too. And and then it really is going to help us and help all that we're doing here. So, without any further ado, Richard, how are you, man?
I'm doing well, Bill. It's great to be here.
Great to see you. You're just a little on my side. You're just a little like jittery in your camera. I don't know if you can see it on your side or not, but yeah, I don't know
Oh,
if you.
shoot. No, I can't. Yeah, it looks good on mine.
Okay, not having any lag issues or anything.
No, from my side, it looks really good. So,
Okay, well,
you sure your
for
Ethernet cable didn't fall out of the hub again?
I just actually just reached over and checked that just to make sure. Yeah, so I think we're doing okay. I think we're doing okay. So
Yeah,
so yeah,
let me
tell us
know.
about what you're into.
Yeah. Well, you asked me a little bit about myself. So, I'm a pastor's kid. So I've always been around ministry and the church. I became a Christian when I was 7 years old. And I grew up with a passion for apologetics, philosophy, worldview, logic, those sorts of things, because my dad studied under Norm Geisler at SES in the early
Oh, cool.
2000s. So as he was learning it, I was growing up in it, and it's just normal for me. So
Mm.
learning about that kind of thing, being able to do an advanced degree with HCU now was just felt like home, right?
Mhm.
For many people, I know apologetics is very intimidating or seems like a big mountain to climb if you're a beginner. But I saw the value of growing up with it and having that side of my faith formed from an early age, which I think is part of where I get my passion for, like you said, helping young people build a foundation of faith built in part with apologetics in mind from that early age. And so my dad read C.S. Lewis's Narnia to me and my brother
Mm.
when we were kids. And,
Good man.
we're just
Good
really
man.
formed by stuff like that. I know, right? I can't wait to do that with my kids when they get a little older.
How old are your kids right
So
now, Richard?
yeah, so a little about my family. I've been married now to my wife for 8 years, just about. In 2 weeks, it'll be our anniversary. So I got
Mm.
to figure out what we're going to do to celebrate. Don't tell my wife that I said that.
How old are your
Uh,
kids?
the Yeah, so my kids are 5 and 3 and 1. So we are tired, man. It is awesome.
Yeah. So I could see why this. I could see part of the reason why your mind's probably here. It's like you're wanting to
Yes,
write the books that your kids need to be reading.
that's exactly right. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So tell us about your book projects. Tell us what's going on there. Like you this is really interesting because as we were talking earlier today, a huge need in the apologetics world is um, getting kids thinking about this stuff, and it's
Yes.
something that I've been passionate about for a long time and used to do in my church plant. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, maybe, but I want you to talk about your vision for this just right off the bat. Like, where are you going with this, man? What's so you're talking about
Yeah.
introducing apologetics to 5 year olds. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, and there's other people who are really doing this well. And so there's people like Jay Warner Wallace who do, his cold case Christianity for kids, or Melissa Kane Travis before she started writing more in the academic space. She wrote a number of kids books, and certainly William Lane Craig, who wrote his series of books with the goose and the bear and those sorts of things. Uh, whenever I have someone who asks me, well, how do you explain the Trinity? I hand them Dr. Craig's kids book, and then they understand the Trinity. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool. But
yeah.
yeah, so for me, really, this started a couple years ago when my wife and I were going through a tragedy, and we lost a child to miscarriage. And
Mm.
really, through that process, I had just taken creative writing with Holly Ordway, Dr. Ordway at HBU, and she had been sort of teaching us about short story and poetry and those sorts of things to just as other modes of communicating truth, right? So as I was grieving the loss of our unborn child, who is pretty early along, we basically found out that my wife was pregnant, and then a few days later, we found out she was losing the baby.
Mm.
Um, so it was very hard. And so part of my grieving process was, I'll never forget, I was in my office at church where I was on staff as the youth and worship pastor at the time in Nebraska. Um, and I just sort of imagined myself having a conversation with my unborn child about what heaven is like. And so I just started writing this conversation. And that became my first book, What is Heaven Like? And really what I was grieving was the loss of that this conversation couldn't happen, right? But really the joy that my child already knows what heaven's like. So uh, we I had written this and just thought, oh, that was kind of a cool little thing that happened. But I showed it to my wife and then a few friends, and they said, hey, you should publish this. And I'm like, no one knows me. No one would buy the book. Like, I don't even know how to do that. And but again, Dr. Ordway's advice on how to get things going with publishing really came in handy. And I started knocking on some doors, and God provided funds to self-publish, and it was off. And about a year later, published that book. Like you mentioned, you can still buy it on Amazon or on my website. And it sold over 500 copies. And
Mm,
for me, a no one at the time in the middle of Nebraska, it's like, you know what? Uh, that was pretty cool. I want to see where God takes this. And I found my imagination just sort of being filled with more stories and thinking,
mm,
wow, maybe my imagination and apologetics passion have a place and it's meeting a need. So I really just started asking the Lord, like, all right, what should I do next if there is a next thing? And that leads us to the project that I'm excited about launching here in a couple days, where my next book, I'm writing on the topic of beauty, and I'm dedicating it to my oldest daughter, Ella. The main character's name is Ella, and her story is kind of a coming of age story, really short, geared toward girls aged about 5 to 8 or 10. Uh, so it's a short picture book, but it's a story of a girl who wants to know what it means to be beautiful and where that comes from. So that's what's been going on the last couple of years.
that's really awesome. You know, it's amazing when I hear your story, like how God can take things like that and just turn it around, for the good,
Yes.
and put that real yearning for heaven, in your heart, and that glorious reunion we're all going to have. And wow,
Yes.
man, so God's really doing something through you, and really doing something amazing there. So, for those who are not, um, used to this kind of language, where you're talking about apologetics and story, we can
Yeah.
use this term imaginative apologetics. Now, I think people,
Yes.
if they're somewhat familiar with apologetics, they're familiar with things like historical apologetics, philosophical apologetics. Maybe they're familiar with the debates in YouTube of Mike Licona giving historical proofs for the resurrection, or William Lane Craig giving a deductive moral argument with Sam Harris and Notre Dame as they're arguing back and forth. Um, and William Lane Craig winning that debate soundly. By the way, if you've never seen it, is just, I felt so sorry for Sam Harris. That's okay. But and even scientific proofs for God, and John Lennox and all the wonderful stuff he's doing. You mentioned Melissa Cain Travis, another great scientific apologist. Um, but imaginative apologetics, when I speak in churches and I bring up that word, they're like, "What is that? What do you mean imaginative
Yes.
apologetics?" So maybe you'd like to introduce some of our people to, like, your thoughts on imaginative apologetics and why that's important.
Yeah. Great question. Well, and it's imaginative, not imaginary. So I'm not doing make believe apologetics over here, right?
Right.
Uh, so when you say imaginative, really what comes to mind is C.S. Lewis's essay on meditations in a woodshed. And what he does in this essay is he basically says, look, there's two ways of looking at something. You can look at something or you can look along something. And he sort of says, picture this woodshed. You can kind of picture it, an old beaten down woodshed in the back of your yard. And you go in there and you can see as the sun is coming down, a beam of light coming down through like the crack above the door, right? You can just picture this. And he says you can look at it and you can almost examine it, right? So you can see sort of the dust and whatever fluttering in this beam of light, and you can think about it, right? But there's a different experience when you step into the beam and when you look along the beam, in his words, and you sort of look out and along it. It's like you're stepping, it almost becomes something you experience more than you're
Mm-hmm.
something you're simply contemplating. And both are good. But what I find with kids is if you try to get them to sit through a Sunday sermon, you can't really do that very well. Maybe they start to get older and they're able to comprehend more, but if you tell them a story, then all of a sudden they're engaged with the characters and they start to like certain characters, and implicit in the choices the characters make are moral decisions, and kids just pick that up like, wow, that was a bad choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just are very intuitive that way. And You even think about how the ancients used to communicate moral values and duties. They do it through myth. And that was how, through the great heroes and the gods of various cultures, implicit in all of those mythologies was a moral code. And that's really what imaginative apologetics does, is said, all right, we have this almost function or organ of meaning, and that's the imagination. So how do we make truth meaningful? It's through story. So,
Hmm.
embedded in not so much my first book, I didn't do this as much there, but certainly in my next project, I really tried to embed, or in C.S. Lewis's way of thinking, smuggle theology into the story so
Yeah.
that it's almost as though you find yourself coming to conclusions as the characters are going through various plot arcs and or plot points and character arcs and making decisions and getting betrayed and lied to and finding the truth and stumbling upon it, and the sense of relief when they find the truth, right? That's the climax of the story. So for me, telling stories is a very effective way of communicating truth. And when you're sort of taking an apologetics angle at it, when you're combating lies of culture, say, while also presenting the truth, then really what you're doing is just a very simple, logical this, not this, right? And that just starts to create categories
Yeah.
in little children's brains, right?
Yeah.
Discern what's true.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few of these stories that C.S. Lewis wrote, that and how he used that to smuggle theology and apologetics and things into the minds of people. And it amazes me. Whenever that, I was blessed to take a class under Louis Marcos here at HCU. Back then it was HBU. But It was a class on Lord of the Rings, and there was a student that sat behind me that was from Iran, and she was a Muslim, and she said that she loved C.S. Lewis's stories so much that she wanted to learn more about Tolkien's ideas and Lord of the Rings and stuff, and she was really attracted to this fantasy world that was being created, and it's like Christian theology was made attractive to my classmate who came from a totally
Yes.
different worldview through stories, and I thought, wow, that is so neat. So let's talk a little bit about how Lewis did this and how that's informing the way you're doing these books as well. Um, so let's talk about Lord of the Rings a minute. So what are you talking about? He smuggled theology into Lord of the Rings. I mean, like, to some that might sound far fetched. I don't know what,
Mm-hmm.
but to those of us in the know, we knew what Lewis was up to there, and it amazes me that he wrote those books and had not very long. It's like 6 months or something. I think he sat down and wrote those books. It was crazy. But it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like he knew what he was doing, and that was explicit. Like, he was explicitly trying to tell the Christian um, narrative from a fantasy perspective, and
Right.
so yeah, like, so
Yeah.
what's some of your favorite takeaways from Narnia and some of the things that he did there and
Yeah.
how that works?
Yeah. Oh, and Lewis, yes, he was a master at that.
Yeah.
And he sort of gave away the bag at one point. I forget, it was the beginning of, I forget which book it was. But they're up on a mountain with Aslan, and Aslan says essentially, get to know me so you can know who I am in the other world, right? He kind of gives away what he's doing, gives away the game. Uh, but yeah, when you step into story and you start relating to characters, and so one of my favorites is in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, when uh, Edmund goes and meets the White Witch, and she's got the Turkish delight. And reading that as a kid and being like, oh man, I just want that, that sounds amazing. And thinking about this Turkish delight and, what the White Witch has to offer. And, then finding out, oh man, but she was trapping him. And look what ended up. It was like, and just, I got it. I just understood it as a child, right? That was temptation. Temptation looks attractive, but it leads you to destruction, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then rereading that again as an adult, the way that Lewis describes the process, almost that internal conversation of temptation, of desire gone astray, right? Of trying to have that desire improperly satisfied in the Turkish delight and that hook that got in his soul in that moment. It's like, wow, Lewis was doing a lot more than just telling a little thing about a candy. He
Right.
was really showing the power of temptation and almost a scheme of the enemy, right? What the enemy does through this little interaction about candy, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
And how that
yeah.
candy just really caused a lot of problems. And
Oh,
that, that
yeah. The
kid's
whole
just
story doesn't happen if that. Yeah.
yeah. And it, yeah, it's cool. He showed the ripple effect of sin basically through that little illustration. And that's a good place for, if you're reading that as a parent, to stop with your kids and say, okay, so this is what sin is like. This is a great
Yes.
illustration of sin, and how
Hmm.
it'll always take you farther than you want to go.
Oh,
and
yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
so yeah, and then on top of that, Lewis was so good at smuggling in um, medieval literature nods and all this other stuff. I mean, Narnia's just got layers to it, and gosh, just such an amazing way of telling things. And who doesn't? I mean, you make the connection, especially. I mean, everybody knows, like, when Aslan offers himself to die, it's like, boy, this is clear. And even just reading that as an adult, I never read Narnia as a kid. I read it as an adult. Man, that caused me to tear up a little bit. I was like,
Oh, yeah.
this is heavy. It's really heavy, and it's just a powerful way to get people's imagination rolling. And
Hmm.
it amazes me how many secular people I know aren't Christians at all that like Narnia just because of the fantasy, the fantasy approach, and it's even
That's right.
more so in Lord of the Rings. Boy, we could. So, are you a Lewis or Tolkien fan? Both? You like one more than the other, or where are you at with that?
Yeah. I'm more familiar with Lewis's work. Tolkien scares me, man. When you go deep into what he does,
Yeah,
he is so deep.
yeah, it is pretty incredible. Of course, he's inventing languages and all kinds of things whenever he's writing. Such a scholar, such a brain. Those guys. I mean, they just we need about 100 of each of those guys, in
Yeah.
academia. But yeah, I mean, Tolkien was the same way, and here, he's smuggling in, just one illustration off the top of my head is the prophet, priest, and king illustrations um, within Lord of the Rings, where you have the priest obviously is Gandalf, the wizard, and then you have King Aragorn, who plays obviously the king, and then it's like, so what? Where does the prophet come in? And the prophet, or no, I'm sorry, let's say the prophet is Gandalf. The priest, sorry, I'm say it again. Prophet is Gandalf. King is Aragorn, but the priest is Frodo. And it's like,
Hmm.
what does that mean? It's like, what is that? When I first discovered that, and he goes deep into this Jewish theology of how the priest had to carry the burden for the people and made atonement for all these things. And here's Frodo walking all through Middle Earth carrying a ring around his neck. That's this heavy burden that's obviously killing him, taking life away from him, and was just more than what most men could ever bear. And but he was counted worthy. He was sanctified for that purpose, and it's just like, man. I mean, if you understand like Catholicism and Catholic theology, which I'm not a Catholic, so I rely heavily on people like Holly Ordway and Michael Ward and people like that to help me understand that more
Yep.
deeply. It's it's just crazy how deep he took that in layers. It's almost like he's unpacking all of this theology with every turn in Lord of the Rings. And he said that he did that um, implicitly the first time he wrote it. And he said, obviously, I can't hide my worldview here, so he made it more explicit the second run, like it in his final draft. It was a little more explicit. He
Hmm.
said that in one of his letters. So I mean, these guys were intentionally doing this. It wasn't just the excess of their worldview; it was what they did. That's how they did it. Um, Back to Lewis, though. I'm assuming you're a big fan of The Great Divorce.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's a book that's completely in my everybody knows Lewis for three things. I feel like off the bat, if they know Lewis and they just been introduced to Lewis, Screw Tape Letters, Chronicles of Narnia,
Yep.
and Mere Christianity. Everybody knows that. Then there's this other layer of people who are just they're like, I can't get enough of that. They'll say things like, "Man, have you read Till We Have Faces?" It's like you're reading Lewis, aren't you? It's like,
Yeah.
you read The Four Loves? Have you read? So one of my favorite B-side Lewis books, and it's probably my favorite Lewis book, is The Great Divorce, where he does this "what you're trying to do" a lot, and I think that's probably the most explicit and realistic approach to fiction that he did. So here's these people hopping on this bus, going on vacation in the outskirts of heaven because they're in hell, and hell's this rusted out old town. Which, if you know Lewis, he's like going into all. I'm kind of nerding out right now. He's going into, like, he was not a big fan of modern technology and all this stuff. So I thought it was fitting that he made this rusted out old factories and all this stuff. And so here they're hopping on these buses and going to the outskirts of heaven. And then the people, of course, he says in the introduction of the book, the big critique this book always gets is like, oh, this is such bad eschatology. What's he talking about? Purgatory or something? It's like, he says this is fiction. Use your
Yes.
imagination a little bit, calm down. And like, here's these people that are getting on the outskirts of heaven, and their loved ones and their friends are coming to evangelize them and say, would you like to, like, come into heaven and things like that. So I always love to ask my Lewis fans, like when I talk to guys like you, Richard, like, what is your favorite chapter of The Great Divorce? And if you've not read it, each chapter is like a different person talking to somebody. So who's your favorite person, your favorite character from The Great Divorce, and what was significant, do you think, about bringing them into, like what did you take away from that? Like, what did you take away from
Yeah.
their interaction with their friend or loved one?
Absolutely. So one that always sticks out, and it's not necessarily my favorite, but it's one that's really influenced the way that I've written this next project that I'm doing Kickstarter that's starting on Friday, right? On beauty. So there's an interaction with a damned soul from hell who's a painter, an artist, and
Oh yeah.
he's got he's looking around and he just can't believe what he sees. He's so excited, right? He's finally in heaven. And then he starts to explain to one of the saints, I got to get back. I got to get back so that I can paint what I see. I got to get that back to all my painting stuff.
I forgot
And
my paints.
yeah, I forgot it. What am I? Can't believe it. Tearing his head out,
Yeah.
his hair out, and the Saints are going, "Well, you're in it. You're in beauty. You don't need
Mm-hmm.
to go back and try to capture it. You're here. You're in the place. Uh, this is beauty incarnate, right? You're not trying to capture it in your art anymore. You can just enjoy it, be in it, be
Mm-hmm.
look along the beam, right? Just experience beauty. So, goodness, truth, all of that. And he couldn't do it. He said, "I got to get back." So he goes back onto the bus, presumably to go get his oil paintings and do a bad job of trying to capture heaven, right? Uh, but what I love about one of that about the interaction is one of the saint goes, you in your art have forgotten the purpose of the art. You've made it about the canvas and the paint, and you've forgotten. It says something like you've forgotten the light behind the art,
Yeah.
right? That
You're doing art
whenever we're
for art's sake.
capturing
Yeah. My
for its
favorite
own
quote.
sake,
Yeah, you're doing art for its own sake. And it's like, yeah, when I walk through an art museum and I get into that modern, postmodern section, almost can't help but think about that interaction every time. I'm not an art critic, but I mean, it's just like, yeah, that's what that is. It's art for art's sake. It's like, here we have this big
Hmm.
yellow circle on a white canvas. Cool, I guess. But it's art for
Yeah.
art's sake. It has no meaning, no purpose, no beauty behind it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. So that really influenced my thinking on what beauty is, right? It points. So in my book, uh, what is or Am I Beautiful is the name of the book. And the Kickstarter goes live on Friday. It'll go for through the month of December, and it follows a young Tace, which is a candle, through receiving her light and being duped by these other candles who belong to an organization called the Sparks, who are trying to sort of lie and swindle their way into getting all these new candles into their cult underneath the floor of the candle shop,
mm,
right? And so they basically tell her that the way to be beautiful is to be noticed. That's what they say. Be beautiful, be noticed. They're dancing around her saying this, and she's all confused and it's very disorienting. And they say, just like this. And so I can't wait to have this illustrated. I can picture it in my head. But the candles, they start going like this with their face and then pop, right? Their light just explodes. Uh,
wow.
and and so Ella, the main character, this Taste, she looks at the other candles and she goes, "Wow, that was beautiful." But what's interesting is candles are not designed to do that, right?
Mm,
And through meeting other candles as she goes down, she'll see that as they're doing that, there's black marks on themselves as they're trying to pop, right? And through that process, she learns that there underneath that lie is, in order to be beautiful, you have to do something that's contrary to your design or
mm,
contrary to your nature. You
yeah.
have to change the way that you are or change the way that you present yourself to a destructive degree in order to be beautiful. And so she meets, I kind of took a page from Lewis or Dante, and I give her a guide at the end of the story. And she meets an older candle named Clive, right? See what I did there? And so Clive says to her, the way that you can be beautiful is to humbly embrace your design. You
Mm,
are made by the maker. And that's where your beauty comes from. And so he likens it to like stained glass. They're up on a mantle near a big stained glass. The candle shop used to be a church. And he says it's almost as if you are stained glass, but without the light coming through, that is beauty, right?
mm,
When the
yeah.
light comes through the stained glass, but when you try to keep beauty for yourself, when it becomes about attention or about just making others notice you, it's like stained glass with no sun, right?
Mm,
All beauty, all art points to a maker. It's that light behind the canvas idea. So really the beauty of the story or the truth of the story at the end is, hey, the way that you can radiate beauty is to know that your beauty isn't yours. It comes from your maker. And you can just enjoy that. Enjoy how you're made. Enjoy how the
mm,
maker has designed you. And that enjoyment is it smells like beauty, right? It's that humility, it's that pointing to the maker, it's not pride or selfishness or vanity, it is just humility, right? So
yeah.
that's the principle of the story. And a lot of where I got that inspiration was from that scene in The Great Divorce.
Mm, that's really cool, man. I was thinking about that. It's some of these huge churches we have in Houston is when you're talking about um, the light coming through the stained glass. It's so true, and I'd never thought about that until you were explaining it. Those churches almost look like a totally different church at night than when they do during the day when the light is coming through
Yes.
them. And it points back to this telos, right? This telos that we're all created for this purpose. Telos is Greek word for purpose or design. There's an innate design in things. There's a perfection, like when Jesus said, You shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. That means complete in your purpose. You are to be complete in your purpose, just as your Father in heaven is complete in his purpose. And um, the purpose of a stained glass window is for light to shine through it and for it to be beautiful. And when the light doesn't shine through
That's
it,
right.
then it doesn't have the purpose that it's that's made for. That's one of the things that I really love about apologetics is it really points us back to the cultural mandate. It points us back to why we were created and that we can be co-creators with God. Now we're not talking about like speaking things into existence. Matter of fact, I've been reading some light reading on that here lately. Anyway, recommend this book. But I was actually going to ask Richard. I said, "So you're at a Bethel church? I've been reading about your church here
Yeah.
lately." So, just kidding. Absolutely wrong. That is not true at all. No. But that's an insider apologetics joke. That's for all of our apologetics
Yeah,
fans.
exactly.
So, but um, no, it's just working. Co-laboring with God to create culture around us, and it's just what a beautiful picture that is. That He invites us into that, and I really feel like what you're doing, as by example, is a lot of what we need in the church today. Is for some people to see that you know that this is why we get so it's like we know when we ask somebody why did you get saved, you wonder something, you'll hear answers sometimes like, well, I just didn't want to go to hell. It's like, okay, but for what purpose have you been saved? What purpose have I been saved? I guess the Great Commission, but what do you mean? It's like, well, to be a light everywhere, to bring Jesus into the culture, and this cultural apologetics is the way to go when you're doing this. So I appreciate your heart, brother, and what you're doing, and reaching out to these young kids because these books, like, what's the age groups of these books you're writing? Like you might have mentioned that before, but like what? I don't think you ever put really a number on it. Like these are children's books, right? So what's your target
Yeah.
age here?
Yeah, my target age is roughly age 5 to 10. And
Yeah,
I have had kids a little bit younger. I think 4 is probably the youngest for my first book who's enjoyed it and gotten it. Um, but I've had older kids also read it and enjoy it, 12. Um, but something that I'm finding too is at the end of my first book and this next one, I'm also doing this is just have a little parent discussion guide and
yeah,
for families to be able to have good questions, good conversations about what they just read. And I have had probably more parents say to me, I didn't know that's what heaven was like. Now I actually want to
wow,
go there. And I, I'm just thinking to myself, because in the first book I address like the problem of boredom in heaven, thinking it's just going to be lounging around drinking margaritas on the beach forever. Like, well, who would want to do that?
yeah,
Maybe for a few days, not for eternity. And uh, and the idea that heaven is going to be like somehow less real than this life, right? It'll be like uh, floating around on clouds, almost all dogs go to heaven type vision of heaven.
wow. There's
And
a
yeah,
throwback.
there's a
There's a
throwback.
throwback.
Hey, I grew up on that movie, so it's a good one. It's a classic.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that was one of my
yeah,
sister's
yeah.
favorite movies growing up. She used to watch that
Oh,
all the
for
time.
sure.
Yeah, and I love it
Yeah,
too. It's
yeah,
some great characters in All
yeah.
Dogs Go to Heaven, man, for
Oh
sure.
yeah, oh yeah.
all
Yeah.
throughout
So
the All
yes, to
Dogs.
answer your question,
Yeah,
it's about 5 to 10, but I do find parents really benefiting from just thinking through the ideas in my first book, and my early readers have said the same thing about my next one. That there was one mom in her 30s, and she said about my book on beauty, I wish I had this book when I was a little girl,
yeah,
because she has just I mean, common to women, just really struggled with self-image and self-worth. And she said, I wish I understood what beauty was when I was a young girl. She said, that would have just helped me so much.
yeah,
And that's really what I want to do is some of that preventative work. You can't stop sin, but if you get good ideas inside of kids instilled in them early, that formation lasts, you know. Train up a wild or a child the way they should go, and they when they're old, they won't depart from it, right? That's the idea. So,
Yeah, and it really humbled me to see, and I was kind of a latecomer to knowing that that Bill Craig had written books about, you know, um, for children and things. I was like, man, I wish I knew about that when I was doing youth ministry, like with these little kids. I wish my wife knew about this stuff because it's a big need, and I'll tell you why. I mean, we were in eastern Kentucky, in a rural part of eastern Kentucky, pretty isolated part of the country, really. Um, a lot of the cultural issues didn't come there until like the last, until lately, last 5 or so years and things. And I can remember doing youth group, and man, these kids, they were asking questions. I can remember at least like two or three different situations where, well, we'll end with the positive one, but one negative was we were talking in youth group, and I always made sure with any ministry I worked with, didn't matter drug recovery ministry that we did for many years in our church, if it was youth group or whatever, always room for questions at the end because I don't want to leave people hanging if they have something on their heart. I'm like, listen, anything I just said, you have a question, I will stay here as long as you want me to and talk about it. So, and sometimes these kids just have random questions, and almost all of them are apologetic oriented. At about fourth grade, I started seeing it, especially young kids in youth group asking questions like, "Well, if God created everything, who created God?" You know, just stuff like that. And for some of these kids, like the typical youth group, is just like, "Oh yeah, everybody asks that question," and they kind of laugh it off. But this was a serious hang up for this little girl because she was just like, well, in her fourth grade mind, what she was seeing for the first time, really thinking deeply about God, is this infinite regress or whatever. It's just like, what do I do with this? I don't know. How can so if like why should I listen to him if somebody else created him? That's how it was manifested. And so us talking about that one day in youth group and just having this basic apologetics discussion, that's the negative. Here's the positive. One of my older kids is sitting there listening to this, and she's like, I've always had this question. I just kind of took it for granted that the Bible said who God was. And I was like, yeah, but this has always been in the back of my mind. I've never heard it explained before. That it really
yep.
depends on what God you're talking about here. There can't be two infinite beings. So, God is never created. That's what the Bible says about God. And it was a great discussion about the nature of who God is and his ontology and things. And so the older kid gets so fired up about it, she comes back to church. She's like, she contacts me through Facebook or something and was like, I am so excited about this. Like, you have some more videos or whatever. So I started sending her like William Lane Craig videos and things like that. And by the time the next Sunday rolled around, she was ready to give about a 5 minute presentation or something for church on Sunday night, and she was excited about it. She got up and read her presentation. She's like, "This is just so life giving for me." And so you just never know. And it was kind of telling about our youth group. It was kind of a small church, so we had seniors in high school sitting there with fourth graders, and we're all, but on some stuff like that, they're all on the same level. And I can remember one kid, I was talking about the cultural mandate and how God wants you to play a part in his kingdom and play a role in his kingdom. And this was a very like hardened kid, like had a hard heart. But I was glad he was coming and everything. He wasn't disruptive or anything. You could tell he was kind of closed to this whole thing, and his friends were coming. And he goes, he says one day, like, I said, yeah, and God wants you to play a role. That's the whole point of salvation. And the kid literally, Richard, just lights up. He's like, what? What do you mean? Pastor Bill, what do you mean? God wants me to play a role? Like, what can I do for God? And for him, that's where the gospel started. Like, he got saved that night, because he's like,
Wow. Oh,
I can
that's
do
cool.
things for God. Wow, I can create. Wow, I can. He's just so excited.
Yeah.
And and then like the, you know, and I can think of just one last story, and I'll let you, and we'll open up for Q&A. By the way, that's part of this, guys. In these last 10 or so minutes, if you have any questions for me or Richard, put them in the comments. I see them come up on my side screen over here on the little monitor, and we will answer these questions like we did with the last broadcast. This is something we're going to do every time. I should have said that a little bit earlier. But if you have any questions, put them in the comments. And if you put the comments on our YouTube channel, they will for sure come straight to my screen right now. I can't bring up YouTube, but I can see it on our program here. So if you have any questions, head on over to YouTube, find the Truth Conversation. We're live. Put a question on there, or on our Facebook page. I think it'll show up there as well. Um, I'm saying all that because I logged off last time, and on my private Facebook page, it actually the questions didn't show up. So I got on there and I saw like a whole wall full of questions and comments that I couldn't see. I was like, "Oh no, this is sad. I wish we could have talked about this." But both Richard and I have a master's degree in cultural apologetics, and so it doesn't have to be anything related to this post. Maybe you said, "Well, here's my question that never got answered in youth group. What about this?" And we could get to test our apologetics chops a little bit. That's a little scary, a little dangerous, but we'll do it. Okay, so but no, the last thing I was thinking about apologetics and kids and youth ministry is I want to say that these girls were in fourth grade and they always kind of ran together. All three of them had the same classes together at school, in a small school and elementary school. And they come to youth group and they were just super excited because they'd been talking about religion in school, in public school. And of course, sometimes that raises hair on the back of my neck when I hear things like that. I'm like, depends on who the teacher is. That could have been good. It could have, who knows. And so they're like, yeah, we guess what we learned today. Guess what we learned, Pastor Bill. Guess what we learned? We learned that all gods are the same. And they said something like that. I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, that Christians and Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists, it doesn't matter. We are all worshiping the same God. Isn't that awesome? I'm like, And I could tell I didn't want to squelch their passion for this idea, because like they were excited about something. So I was real careful not to just put out their fire and be like, well, that's totally wrong. And let me tell you why. And I said, well, that is really something that you learned that. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do is next week, I'm going to bring the Quran and the Vedas and the Bible to youth group, and we will discuss the nature of these ideas, which I was super excited about because I love world religions. And so the next week, yeah, that's what we went over, and they found out really quick that
Wow.
these are describing God a little. These are differently. These go beyond cultural interpretation. These are making truth claims, and these two things cannot be true at the same time. So they not only learned about world religions, but they learned about the nature of truth, epistemology or whatever you want to call it. They were just so this was we're talking fourth and fifth grade. They were grasping that. So sometimes I think we really underestimate what these kids can grasp and comprehend, and I really appreciate what you're doing, Richard, with these with these books and things. So here's what I'm going to do. We don't have any comments coming up, but I have the sneaking suspicion that perhaps we might have some comments somewhere if I go digging in some of these live streams. We're streaming on 3 different platforms right now, so I'm going to see if we can find. Here we go. We have 5. Um, um, let's see. We have some. Okay, Riz actually said, I have a question, but I don't see his question come up. Riz is one of our classmates. You remember Riz, right?
Oh yeah.
Riz is so cool. So,
Yeah. Riz is the man.
yeah. And then somebody said they couldn't hear us as well, so I don't know. Um, I don't know what's going on there. Let's see. Here we go. Riz says, you might have already talked about it, but what prompted you to write a children's book about heaven? It would be worth revisiting that for those who've come on late things. So, yeah. So that's what Riz was asking. So go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I'll summarize. Went into the full story at the beginning of the stream, but really a couple years ago, my wife and I went through a miscarriage, and through that process of grieving, I realized that there were conversations with my unborn child that I'd never get to have, and one of which being about heaven. I think I had like just written a paper on heaven for Dr. Ward, and had just been thinking a lot about it. And obviously, grieving the loss of a loved one, you think about heaven anyway. And so, really, what is heaven like was the conversation that I wish I could have had with my unborn child about what heaven's like. And so that was what prompted it and what kind of pushed the project over the edge. And now I've just sort of found myself with this new passion, and would like to. I don't remember if I mentioned it. I know I mentioned it to you earlier today, Bill, when we were on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
but this next book, I'd like to make a trilogy. If the Lord provides the funds to make the first book happen and we can build some momentum, I have two more books in the hopper that I'm working on. So would love to really build this world, and this sort of fantasy world like we were talking about that Lewis and Tolkien did. And I'm not claiming to be the third head of the three-headed monster there, but certainly in that same tradition, trying to do something in that way. So pretty cool.
It sounds like you're doing a really good job with it too. So yeah, if anybody else has any questions, right now I'm checking the chats again because here we go. Here's a question. Just here we go. Wow, my friend Marlinda asked this question, and this is a good question, but putting us right on the spot here. If a child is born out of wedlock, but then you get married, let's see, the child is born out of wedlock, but then you marry that said child's father. Does that mean the child is now a clean child? Um,
Hmm.
and that's yeah, it's not a tough question in the sense that like, oh man, what's the answer to this? Because this is such a moral dilemma. Tough, but it's what I mean by tough question is like there's so much going on there, you know. And I think one of the things that Jesus did with the new covenant is that he abolished some of these cultural laws like this that talked about this. Um, and now we're in a covenant of grace where generational curses and things of that nature can be broken. I don't think I don't know. I mean that's just my personal thoughts on that, you know, because um yeah, I don't buy into the idea that a child is paying for the mistakes of its parents um in a straightforward way, if that makes sense, or like in a way of fate, you know, like that. I think I don't think a child is unclean if it's born out of wedlock, but I will say that's not the
Yeah.
most ideal situation. It's very much not the ideal situation. You can just look at the statistics, not just speaking from a biblical perspective, but statistically speaking, children born out of wedlock just tend to have so many more problems, emotional problems, and um, problems in the future with their own marriage and things like that. I mean, it's not a good situation, and so yeah, but I don't believe that somebody is just cursed because that happens either. I've known some children that came from that situation doing youth ministry that were wonderful kids, accepted Christ early in life, and are living for Jesus today and doing just fine. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus in the redemption business. So that's a great question. Great question, Marlinda. I really appreciate that. Any comment? Would you like to? I'm going to require you to answer something. Get me out of the skillet, brother.
Yeah. No, that I loved how you said that, not ideal, and yet no child is what, dirty, you know?
Hmm.
Children in that sense, are maybe born into more or less ideal situations, but something that I think is good and we should celebrate is when people have children outside of wedlock, but then tie the knot and say, you know what? That moment is not going to define us. We're going to take responsibility for this and we're going to make it right and we're going to provide stability for this child. There's a lot to be said about how admirable that is when many people just sort of part ways and talk about ideal or less than ideal situations for children. So I've known couples over the years, like you said, in my youth groups or people that I know that were in that situation and they got married and they stayed faithful and they had more kids and they're walking with the Lord and it's like, there's grace for that. So be obedient to what you know. And
Amen.
when God brings that to you, then all right, say yes to him and tie the knot and yeah, do what's right from there. So
Very good. So if we have any more questions, if not, we will close it down here soon. You guys have been great, and we really appreciate all of you who have watched and listened and followed us on YouTube. That was a huge uh, plus to our YouTube channel. In this last week, we went from we've almost doubled in size on our YouTube channel, which has went from like 80 to 160 or something like that. The last time I checked, maybe it was like 145 or 50 or something. Well, if we do that again next week, that'd be great. So yeah, like we said earlier, one of the things that you can do to help us is make sure you get on that YouTube channel and just subscribe to the channel and like the videos. And here's a little secret that gets all the algorithms going, and then more people will see this stuff. And I was explaining this to our students the other night. If you believe what we're doing is important, click that subscribe button, click that like button, because that gets the algorithms going in YouTube. Then all of a sudden, like as people are searching things, and we say a word that matches their search, then our video starts showing up for a couple of days, and then they'll see more and more people see it. So if you believe the truth conversation is a valuable thing, I mean, sure, you could give to our ministry financially, and there's ways to do that if you're interested. But just doing something as simple as liking and subscribing really helps us at this phase, especially. So, yeah, get this going, and that way we can get more people like Richard, who is, getting his master's degree in apologetics. He's writing books, and maybe you've not heard his name before tonight, but maybe 3 years from now, this video might go viral because he's on this book tour all over the world, with people signing his books. So, but that's part of the reason why we started this channel, is because I meet people like Richard who's doing awesome things for the kingdom, and they just and can contribute to this great conversation. And we just need more channels like that to get people out there like us who just we're doing our little part, and and it brings glory to God, and I think people ought to know about it and in a sanctified way, and get the exposure out there onto the channels, and flood social media and YouTube with some godly content, because it needs it. Let's be honest. Need more Christians
that's
to be
right.
talking about this stuff. So, well, guys,
That's
thank
right.
you. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. We'll bring this one to a close. Thank you for your Q&A. Thank you for your questions. Be looking for the next. Be looking for the next broadcast. And just keep following us and keep watching us. Keep liking us. Keep subscribing to us. Keep passing us around to your friends, and tell your buddies, and be watching for Richard. When's the anticipated release date of this book? Do we know?
Well, the Kickstarter goes live on Friday, and we're hoping to get the illustrations done in the spring, put everything together, and ship in the summer. That's the goal.
Wow,
And
here we are.
that's the plan, and the plan will go wrong. So, but here's
So
hoping that it goes right.
yeah, we'll provide the link for the Kickstarter in the comments, and then in the on the Facebook streams, and in the description in the YouTube channel. And so if you'd like to give to this cause, that's what a Kickstarter is all about, is trying to get this book kickstarted, and you think this will be valuable. I think it'll be very valuable. I think this is your chance to give to something, and and get this going. I think it's a really cool, really neat cause, really niche cause too. Really, it's pretty cool. Not every day that you get to help get the next book started. It's just pretty neat. So appreciate
That's
you,
right.
brother. Thank you for being on the Truth Conversation, and
Thank
you
you.
are you're
Yeah.
forever our second guest, just after Lewis Marcos.
Hey,
So there
that
you
is a great man. That's an honor to be after Lou.
go. Yeah, if we could all just be after Lou from time to time, it'd be great. All right. Well, God bless you, man. Thank you guys for listening. Be checking us out. Like I said, like and subscribe, and be looking for the next one. Thank you, guys.